Okay, there we go. We remember this time. All right, so we're going to take a look very quickly once again at the language of this Elu Devarim, which is the second paragraph that follows immediately after Birchas HaTorah. And the reason why this is significant, or the reason why it's important, is because it's according to basically just about every single bracha that we ever make, we always perform the task immediately after the bracha is made. So before we do a mitzvah like shaking the lulav and the etrog, we always say the bracha immediately beforehand, which is followed immediately thereafter with the actual task that's being done. So if we made a bracha here for learning the Torah, therefore we immediately begin with the study of Torah itself. So we're just doing a little bit of a review of what we did last week, just so we can just get caught up and we can finish up this paragraph. We start off with the words here, Elu devarim she'adam ocha perosehem ba'olam hazeh. These are the things that a person consumes the fruits of in this world, ha'keren kayemes, yet still the principle remains le'olam haba. It's almost like a financial investment that we're all familiar with. There's a principal and then there's interest. You get the interest, but the principal remains for you. The Eluhain, these are they that give some kind of a benefit in this world, but don't affect the principle in the world to come. Kibbut of the aim. The first one is honoring one's mother or father. Gemilos chasadim, acts of kindness. Hashkomas beis hamidrash shacharis va'arvis, attending the house of study early, both in the evening and in the morning. Hachnosas orachim, welcoming guests. Biker cholim, which is visiting the sick. Hachnosas kala, facilitating a wedding, bringing in or accompanying a bride. Levayos hames, which is accompanying a funeral. Be'ion tefillah, giving focus to prayer. Shalom bin adam lechavero, and somebody who facilitates or someone who fosters peace between man and his friend. These are all the things that the principle remains for you, while the interest is something that you can enjoy even in this world. But Talmud Torah keneged kulam, and the study of Torah is obviously equal to all of them. So we're going to take a look. If you're looking in Rav Schwab's book on prayer, you've had this text in front of you. We're going to begin immediately here with the iPad in. We're going to pick up immediately with the explanation that's given behind many of what we've just said. So the Gemara here is important. We're saying now, if you recall, we said this last week, that when we are studying Torah, we say the brachos before we study the Torah. We then begin the study of Torah, but we have to begin studying all parts of the Torah, at least as the parts as they were conceived of by Chazal. So you have Mikra, which are the Psukim, which are the verses that we say for Birchas Kohanim, which is then followed by the Mishnah, which is the second part, and that's followed by this Brisa over here. Now, Brisa is a snippet of oral teaching that comes from the generation of the Mishnah, yet it wasn't codified. We consider that to be some kind of Gemara, in that it's something that is part of the super literature that explains the Mishnah. Therefore, it's counted as a third category of study. So again, you study all three of these things immediately after you make the bracha for Torah study. Now, one of the things to note, and we did point this out yesterday, that this Elu Devarim that we've quoted, if you look it up in the Art Scroll Chuma, in the Art Scroll Siddur, for example, it will cite a source. It'll cite a source as Shabbos on page 127. Page 127 in Masechah Shabbos. What's interesting to note, again, as Reb Schwab points out, is that the text there is slightly different. It's a variant of what we have in the Siddur before us, which indicates to us that it's perhaps an alternate tradition, or it's a different version, or there were different Brisios that were very similar. The one that we have is absolutely ancient. It comes to us from the very earliest Siddurim, like the Siddur of Rav Amram Gaon, which comes to us from the 9th century. So the first generation of post-Talmudic rabbis had the text as we do in our Siddur. Now, he also works with a thesis, and I was explaining this to my junior high class at Akiva. Thesis is a lot like a hypothesis. You're working with a scientific method, except that this is more of a philosophical discussion. We're not necessarily going to prove the thesis, rather we're going to show how the thesis is a consistent theme, and you can actually work as a way of interpreting the entirety of this paragraph. So let's go. And what is it predicated on? It's all predicated on the fact that there is a Gemara that teaches us, that tells us, Schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka. There is no reward in this world for mitzvahs. What does that mean? Well, it's predicated on the idea that a mitzvah that we do is completely sublime. We have now affected the universe. We have generated sanctity. We have created Kedusha. And as such, the reward that one would receive for such a monumental and such an incredible change to the very fabric and very nature of creation would indicate that this reward should be of exceptional quality. What happens after we pass away? We receive our reward, and the reward that we receive over there is eternal, which is appropriate for the kind of reward that we should receive after having done a mitzvah. But to translate that kind of a reward into the physical realm would to degrade it. It would be make something that's infinite something finite. So we don't like that idea. We don't want there to be a reward for mitzvos in this world. However, the concept here is that while it's true that the reward for mitzvos are reserved for the world to come, here we have a list of things or a list of mitzvos that have some kind of a dividend, meaning the principle remains, but the dividend can be administered or we can receive even in this world. And the thesis here continues even further, according to Rav Schwab. The reward that we receive, the dividend in this world, is similar to the reward of the mitzvah itself, in that it is of a spiritual nature. It's not like, getting good things, like getting a good candy for doing a good mitzvah. That's something that perhaps children would love, but that's probably not going to work for most adults. As such, he says, the dividends that we get, even the dividends that we experience in this world, are of a sublime spiritual nature. And so which are these things that have no measure, but yet still provide a dividend even in this world? We start off again with kibbud av v'em. That's the first one, which is honoring one's mother and father. Honoring one's mother and father is an exceptionally difficult mitzvah to do for two reasons. One reason is because you can never do enough to give them proper honor. There's always more that you can do. You're never done. A. B. Sometimes parents are pains. And as being a pain, it's not always easy to be respectful and reverential of our parents. Sometimes they're downright annoying. So the mitzvah that we if we properly keep this mitzvah, we incur incredible reward in the world to come. And in fact, the Torah itself tells us about some of this reward, right? The Torah says, "L'man ya'arichun yamecha u'leman yitav lach." The pasuk says that you will honor your parents. Why should you do so? Because if you do so, then your days will be lengthened and you will have good stuff. It's so that God will do good things for you. This comes to us from Sefer Devarim. Now, the issue with this is, we have that very famous story in the Talmud of that young man who was instructed by his father to go climb a tree and retrieve some chicks. He fell out of the tree on his way down and died. Well, that wasn't a very long life for listening to his father. It wasn't like all the good stuff that God was going to give him. So the understanding that the Gemara Kedushin comes is that the reward is not something that we will receive in this world, as we said earlier. So what exactly do we mean? You will do this mitzvah so that God will lengthen your days, which means to say He will give you long days in the days that are completely long, a reference to the world to come. So that God will do good for you. It's not a reference to that God will do good for you right now in this reality. Rather, it's about what's going to come to us in the world to come. So we're saying now that the reward that we're going to get for honoring our parents is something that will be delivered to us in the world to come. However, there is a dividend that we do get. What exactly is the reward for listening to your parents? Well, we said it's a long life, it's a good life. Well, that translates, at least as far as a dividend goes, into how we approach our own lives in this world, in this reality, let's say. What's going to happen is that we're going to have a good portion of the world to come. Well, that generates in ourselves, I guess, in a metaphysical sort of way, a satisfaction that we have. Just as we'll be satisfied in the world to come, we also inculcate that, or that is introduced into our personalities. We are happier kinds of people in this world with the portion that we have been allotted. We're also become we're much more resilient people. We're able to withstand all the trials and tribulations that life throws at us. We don't sort of crumble at the moment of some opposition or some barrier or some hurdle that we have to clear. So just as this reward that we get in the world to come is spoken to as being something that is completely good and something that is completely long, that also translates into our attitude in this world. The dividend that we receive is that we become the kind of people who are satisfied with our lot. And as I mentioned last week, also this is borne out by sociological studies. When sociologists talk about what are the greatest factors that determine one's happiness and satisfaction and resilience in adult life, it's the quality of the family relationships that they had, not only as children, but that they continue to maintain going forward. So as such, we do see that this is an actual true response. You give honor to your parents, you're fostering good family relations. That creates in you someone that makes you a happier kind of person and a more resilient sort of fellow or gal. The next one is gemilos chasodim, acts of kindness. Now, gemilos chasodim is all-encompassing. It can be anything, not only giving charity, but also, just being kind to your friends and family. And it's predicated on the idea of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? It means that just as whatever you would want done for you, you do for other people. You are just as concerned about the welfare of others as you are of yourself. And if a person is this sort of a fellow or gal who is concerned about the welfare of others, he receives a spiritual dividend in this world. What is that spiritual dividend? Well, we have this rule we've just quoted here. You love your neighbor as yourself. You'll love your neighbor, you'll love your friend as yourself. Well, we find that a very similar wording is employed when we talk about another mitzvah, which is ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. We say this in the Shema. In the Shema, we say, you will love Hashem, your God. There is an interplay between these two mitzvahs. Not only do they share words, but they share common themes as well. If you are the kind of person who comes to care about other people, it naturally fosters in you a love of God itself. If a person is able to perform acts of kindness, acts of goodness to other people, that changes your nature. It changes you. They say, people want to give back. They want to give back not only because they feel indebted, but also because it feels good to give. It changes you. You become the kind of person that is, who can more easily understand this concept and fulfill the mitzvah of loving God. And we see this throughout Tanakh. David HaMelech, for example, was called a chassid. He calls himself, in the book of Tehillim, he calls himself a chassid. A chassid is a saintly individual. And the Gemara in Birchas explains, based on the context of that verse, he's actually saying, why am I a chassid? Why have I been able to inculcate myself a saintliness and love of God? Well, because I strove, he says, to maintain a love between husbands and wives, and to foster peace between man and his brother and his friend. In order to become an ohev, a lover of Hashem, you have to start off by loving people. We also find that Avraham is also referred to by Hashem as Avraham Ohavi. God refers to Avraham in the prophet Yeshaya as Avraham who loves me, the one who loves me, or the one who loved me. You are good and kind. You are great to other people. You come to love God too. It becomes an easier proposition for you. So again, here you have a mitzvah. The principle remains for you in the world to come, but you get a spiritual dividend even in this world. And the greatest connection, the Rav Schwab, what happened there? Did I lose everyone? I hate that.
Still here.
All right. Yeah. No, this problem with the touchpad here is going all crazy.
Yeah. All okay.
Okay, fantastic. All right. I just lost the screen. Okay, so anyways, the best connection that Rav Schwab brings to the concept of loving your friend here like yourself is how that verse concludes. Take a look at the wording over here. I don't know if you can see it so clearly. We can make this a little bit closer. That's not all that much better, but it's close enough. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Hashem. You will love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. What's the connection between these two parts of the verse? The connection is that if you love other people, if you love your neighbor as yourself, you will come to love Hashem too. All right, what comes next? What comes next is Hashkomas Beis Hamidrash, Shacharis, V'Aravis. Does I do that? Does not make it any better? Does not make it better. No, that does not make it better. All right. Okay, so V'ahavta l'recha kamocha was what we just said is the principle behind Gemilas Chasodim. We're going to see though that theme comes up quite a bit throughout this paragraph. All right, what comes next is Hashkomas Beis Hamidrash Shacharis V'Aravis. This is about going to the house of study both in the morning and in the evening. Notice it does not say those who go to synagogue morning and the evening, because these were two different institutions. You have the Beis Knesses where people prayed, and you have the Beis Knesses where people pray, and you also have, why is this? Oh, there we go. You have the Beis Knesses where people prayed, and you also had the Beis Medrash where people actually studied. This is a reference here to leaving synagogue to go to your place of study. And in fact, the Gemara actually supports this. The Gemara in Birchas says the following. You can see it right over here. Somebody who leaves shul to go to his house of study, v'osek b'Torah, and engages in Torah study while there, zocha mekabel pnei hashchina. There he will experience the revelation of the Shechina, of the divine presence. Shenamar, as it says, Yechu mechayil el choyil. You will go from one host to the other host. I'm not the host as in somebody who welcomes you into your house, like a large number of people. Yeroa el Elokim b'Tzion. You will experience you will appear before God at Zion. So this is a statement here about the importance of Torah study, and this is playing into the concept or the idea that you have a set place to study, and it's not just a room where you go and close your door and study all on your lonesome. No, this is about studying with other people. This is the thrust. This is the theme. You're going from a minyan to a room full of other people studying Torah. There are two reasons, why you want to be studying in a room full of other people studying Torah. It encourages you to continue learning. You're surrounded by people studying. You hear other people reciting the text and reading to each other, arguing, debating, engaging in Torah study as it is meant to be engaged with. You are encouraged. You pick up on that vibe. It invigorates you. You want to do it too. Not only that, but also if you're learning in a place where other people study, if you don't get there on time, somebody else might steal your seat. So all the more reason to go and arrive early. So this is something that has no measure. You should do this as much as you can. There is no not that there's no measure. There's no reward in this world. However, there is a spiritual dividend, and that's the Torah that you studied. You person who studies Torah, I guess optimally the Torah changes you. You become a better person. You become a much more reverent person. You become a more refined person. You become a Ben Torah or a Bas Torah. So the spiritual dividend that we get is the benefits that always come with the study of Torah. All right, what comes next is Hachnosas Orachim, which is welcoming guests. Avraham Avinu sets the precedent for us, and he even shows us just how incredibly significant welcoming guests is. We're told that Hashem came to pay Avram a visit after his circumcision, and Avraham is there, he's present, he's communing with Hashem. All of a sudden, 3 angels show up, and he walks away from God to go welcome the guests, or at least who he thought were his guests. So we see that welcoming guests into their home is more important than the actual communion with the Shechina. When a person invites guests into his home, he becomes closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because he's doing the Ratzon Hashem. And when you do the Ratzon Hashem, you become closer to Hashem. So hence we have this spiritual dividend. This There is no reward in this world that you could possibly receive, but there is a spiritual dividend that you come because you come to understand and know God better. God is always doing things for others. When we do things for others, we come to this greater cognizance of God. We can understand Hashem on his own plane. We can even engage in a level of similar level of sanctity ourselves. And so as such, he says, the practice of Hachnasas Orchim elevates the person to a level surpassing even that of receiving the Shekhinah, like we saw by Avraham. This is the spiritual dividend. And you'll have a little note that I wrote in the bottom in the Hebrew. It's a little bit more clear. It's a little bit more direct, where he essentially says, you now by doing this, make yourself more open to spirituality, ruchnius in general. All right, what comes next? We have Biker Cholin, which is visiting the sick. When a person visits the sick, he is not only performing a great act of kindness to the patient, but he does something for himself. Instead of taking his own good health for granted, he becomes grateful for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he is not sick. There was this book. It was really popular about 25 years ago. It was written by this gentleman who lived in Buffalo. He was an interesting man. He was an Orthodox Jew, and he was hired to teach in the inner city of Buffalo with one of the worst classes. And he wrote a book about his experiences as an Orthodox Jew teaching African-American children at this really, really tough school. He talks about like, the kids once saw him coming out of the washroom and making the bracha of Asher Yotzar. Yeah. And they start mocking the bracha of Asher Yotzar. You're thanking Hashem for, I don't know, for your evacuations, let's call them. That was something that they found incredibly funny. So, the name of the book? Skull caps and switchblades, yeah. But anyway, so what does he do? He takes the kids to the hospital. He asks the principal for permission. This was in the 1980s. Things were a whole lot different back then. You could take the kids and just walk into the hospital, going to like the front lobby of the hospital, and just visiting with the patients. They're saying, hello, how are you? Tell us how are you feeling today? And he took this handful of kids with him to a hospital. And the kids basically come back and talk about how incredibly grateful they are for their good health. And that was his lesson there. Asher Yotzar is about being thankful for your good health. And that's it's a comparable concept over here also. When we sort of visit the sick, to a certain extent, we come to recognize, we realize just how frail our health can be, how tenuous our existence is. And we come to have Hakar Sotov, we come to be very, very grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the health that we do enjoy. We all have our own setbacks, we all have our own health challenges, but there's always somebody worse off than yourself. And you can always be thankful for, only having problem A instead of problem B. The feelings of Hakaras HaTov, the gratitude to Hashem for our health, is the spiritual dividend for visiting the sick. All right, Achnasas Kala, which is providing for a bride. The simplest way to do this is by assisting the bride, making a wedding, by helping her make wedding preparations. This includes, not only helping with the wedding preparations, but also, helping them start a home together, providing furniture, all sorts of household necessities. Not everybody's so fortunate to have friends and family who will always be able to step in and provide for the things that those need. Some people need it at the very beginning of their wedding because they're not going to get it later on. It's a very, very important mitzvah. The mitzvah starts at the beginning, making the shidduch, but it continues on throughout the entirety of the wedding. We're called upon to perform this mitzvah, and it's referred to in the Gemara as being misameach chasan v'kala, fostering happiness or gladness between the bride and the groom. And the Gemara in Birchas actually goes through an incredible amount of detail discussing about what the reward will be for somebody who does this. It gives a whole list of things, but most notably, the Gemara cites the opinion. It's actually in the Yerushalmi, it's not in the Bavli. He says that if someone performs the mitzvah of, at the very least, gladdening the chasan and the kala at their wedding by dancing with them, if one does so, then it's considered as though they have rebuilt the city of Yerushalayim. So what exactly does that mean? If you bring joy to a chassan and a kala at their wedding, it's considered as though you have rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash. Well, one of the things that we're told, it actually comes from the tochacha. It comes from the rebuke that we receive from Hashem. We're basically told, you are going to suffer because you're not keeping Torah and mitzvos. The way it's phrased in the Torah is kind of weird. It doesn't simply say because you didn't keep the Torah and the mitzvos. Rather, it's asher lo ovadato es Hashem elokecha b'simcha u'b'tov levav. It's because you did not serve Hashem through the performance of mitzvos with happiness and joy. We're not supposed to just do mitzvos by rote, by just something that we do, a folk custom. It's something that we live. It's something that we breathe. It's something that we're driven to do. It's something that we legitimately joy. It's something that brings us happiness, feelings of wholeness and completion. That's what we're called upon to do by Hashem. When we cause joy to a chassan and kala, we are doing a mitzvah. And we're doing a mitzvah with joy, because who can be grumpy at a wedding? So we are doing a mitzvah. We're performing a mitzvah with joy and gladness. There's no greater tikkun, as they say. There's no greater rectification to not doing the mitzvahs with simcha, as what facilitated or brought about the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. There's no greater tikkun than doing a mitzvah with simcha. So when we're rejoicing, we are doing a mitzvah. We're doing it with a bren. We're doing it with simcha. This is the sort of the rectification, and this is in and of itself the spiritual dividend of this mitzvah, because we are gaining incredible reward. We're sort of engaging in the act of rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash. All right. Now, halvayas hameis, escorting the dead. So this includes everything that one does, whether at every aspect, at every level of the Chevra Kadisha. Anyone who's involved in the actual burial, which is called the kavura, or the actual sort of the funeral, as the body is sort of escorted to the graveside, which is called the levaya. We are engaged in this mitzvah over here, and the spiritual dimension can be found he quotes in Koheles and Ecclesiastes. He says, Tov l'lechas el beis avel milechas el beis mishta. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a party. And the living should take notice. When we go to visit an avel, we're confronted by our own mortality. We're recognizing that our time here is short, and other people may have accomplished so much, but what have we actually accomplished? Or alternatively, we have so much yet we still have to do. When we come face to face with our mortality, we very often engage in a form of soul searching. So the spiritual dividend of accompanying the dead is the quality of people that we become again. But here it's that encountering mortality prompts us to do teshuva and make a real cheshbon hanefesh, a real accounting, as an attempt to do better. Now, there is some incongruence in the order here. You might notice in this brisa that we've started with. We start off with somebody being unwell, somebody sick. We then take that to gladdening a chassan and a kala, and then we go to death. Shouldn't chronologically it kind of have the order where you go from being unwell to death? Why do we have the wedding in between? So the Stipler Gaon explains as follows. It says, if you want to have a schus to overcome a sickness, and you want to ensure that it not become a funeral, you should engage in the midst of hachnasas kala, which is, again, fostering marriages, facilitating marriages, either through financial assistance or suggesting shidduchim. Why? Well, what happens as a consequence of a marriage? Well, produces children, produces grandchildren. A marriage brings new life into this world. There's an idea, there's a concept that the way a person receives some kind of an accounting in Shamayim according to the deeds that they have done, which means to say that if one acts to create new life in this world, sometimes the way Hashem judges them, or Hashem's judgment incorporates new life for you as well. So if you want to avoid, if you want to perhaps, if one is unwell and they want to avoid the next location, perhaps getting involved in the mitzvah of Hachnasas Kala is a way to sort of perhaps hold that off and facilitate or perhaps foster a real refuah, or a complete healing. So again, this is a mitzvah accompanying the dead that has a principal reward in the world to come, and has a dividend benefit in this world during this life, in that it prompts us to do teshuvah, and perhaps there's this corollary to it, that it also provides an opportunity to sort of incur the merit for further life for yourself as well. All right, Iyun Tefillah, which is focus and concentration on prayer. It's what we're doing right now. So there's no, the principle is a reward that you receive in the world to come. What then is the benefit that we receive from focus and concentration on prayer? There is a Gemara. It's a Gemara in Shabbos. That says that if a person prays for someone else and they have that same need themselves, Hashem answers the prayer not only with regards to the other person, but also with regards to themselves as well. So this is another kind of Gemilas Chasodim, where we're doing something on behalf of someone else. The spiritual dividend is, first, the mitzvah is, and the reward that we get, it comes from the actual prayer itself. But the dividend that we receive from it is that if we're not only praying for ourselves, but praying for others as well, then Hashem will answer our tefillos also. Right. All right. Now, Havo Shalom bin Adam l'chaveiro. Now, I was going through some of this with my junior high class at Akiva, and we're going to see that there actually is a different nusach. There's an additional few words here in this clause. We'll speak about that in a moment. We have bringing peace between man and his fellow. We know that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and Galus, we're talking about the second Beis HaMikdash and the exile that we're currently experiencing, has at its foundation was sinas chinam, the baseless hatred. So we know that machlokas can not only bring about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but can also ruin people's lives. If one can, however, foster peace between enemies, or even between husbands and wives, this is an incredible mitzvah. This was something that Aharon was noted for. He was called a rodef shalom, somebody who pursued peace. And the spiritual reward that one receives in this world is for being the peacemaker. It's that they themselves become beloved by others. They acquire what's called a keser shem tov. People who work to foster peace, in general, are viewed very positively. So the appreciation and the adulation that someone receives for being a peacemaker is that dividend that they receive for being this kind of person. But you'll notice though that there is a focus here. It says basically Havo Shalom bin Adam l'chaver, somebody who fosters peace between man and his friend. In some nuschos, in some of the versions of the Siddur, it actually has an additional line there, and also who fosters peace between husbands and wives, which is a much closer sort of paraphrase of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that talks about being a student of Aharon, not only for fostering good relations between enemies, but also happy and healthy marriages as well. And then he concludes the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The study of Torah is equal to all of them. Now, we're obviously not talking about the study of Torah because we did that already, right? Hashkomas, Beis HaMidrash, Shacharis, Va'arvis, somebody who goes early to the house of study. So we already know about the study of Torah. So what exactly is Talmud Torah? What are we referring to here? Well, Talmud Torah is, as we said last week, is more than just the study of Torah. Talmud Torah is about, the whole way Torah is transmitted. It's about tradition. It's about students. It's about teachers. It's about engagement. It's about teaching and being taught. It's about discussing, debating, and learning with a chavrusa. Talmud Torah is more than just the study of Torah. Talmud Torah is the entire. I'm not even sure if how to refer to it in English actually, but the entire. I guess the entire ether that surrounds Torah study. It's about teaching. It's about receiving. It's about all of those things. Talmud Torah implies so much more than just studying Torah. So Talmud Torah, which is both teaching and studying, debating and engaging, is equivalent to all of them. And this also extends to the idea that if you're not someone who's able to teach yourself, if you're not somebody who is able to who's not able to give over Torah learning or even study on your own, then you can still fulfill this mitzvah by facilitating Torah study through the support of Torah institutions like yeshivos, like shuls that foster Torah learning, like kollel, things much like this. What we're saying is that Talmud Torah is more than just studying Torah, and the way we accomplish this is through any number of means or mechanisms than just simply sitting in a room and reading stuff. Now, we just concluded the Birchas HaTorah. And again, I'm just going to recap. We spoke about how Birchas HaTorah is a necessity because Birchas HaTorah is a bracha. You're not allowed to study Torah until you make these brachos. We then follow that up with actual Torah study. And we incorporate in that Torah study 3 component parts. Mikra, verses, we said that was Birchas Kohanim. Mishnah, which is the first Elu Devarim, and this is Gemara, which is the auxiliary and surrounding teachings, schools of thought and explanation that surround the study of the Mishnah. Again, I spoke to how contemporary Minhag Ashkenaz is to say Birchas HaTorah first thing in the morning. Before Birchas HaShachar even. But the original minhag, as found in the Rishonim, for Ashkenazim anyways, was to not recite Birchas HaTorah at the very beginning, but rather recite it later on in the service, still before Pesukei de Zimra, but you recite Birchas HaTorah, and then you read the verses about the Korban Tamid, the daily regular burnt offering. You follow that up with the Mishnayos Ezuhu Mekoman, which talks about the order of the sacrifice, how it was performed, what locations were a part of the ceremony in terms of where was it slaughtered, where was the blood applied, and then finally we conclude with Rabbi Yishmael with his 13 ways in which the Torah is elucidated. Which actually, interestingly enough, that is the introduction to the Midrash called of Torah's Kohanim, which is the Midrash that deals with Sefer Vayikra and the offering of Korbanos. So even if, according to the original German custom and practice, they recited verses, they recited Mishnah, and then they recited a Midrash, which is part of what we call Gemara, also immediately following Birchas HaTorah. We're pushing Birchas HaTorah earlier in the service, and I told the reason probably why we did that. 2 reasons I said. A, because people, they say Birchas HaTorah that much. We say it earlier in the day, possibly even before we can even bring the Korban Tamid, which means we probably shouldn't say the verses about the Korban Tamid. But another reason is because not everybody says all those parts of the morning service, and as a result, Birchas HaTorah was pushed earlier, and it was given its own set of psukim, Mishnah, and Gemara. I would like to do a little bit more. I'm moving on to the next part of what we have in the Siddur. So again, we have in front of us, let me just move this out. We have in front of us here, okay, so this is Birchas HaTorah here. No, I went too far. Yeah, we start off here with the 15 brachos that we call Birchas HaShachar. We're all familiar with them. We start off with or on the very bottom over here on this page. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. We shouldn't get this in the camera. Asher nasan l'sechvi v'inolach v'in ben yom u'vein laila. Blessed are you, Hashem, our King, Master of the universe, who gave to the sechvi. We'll talk about what that is probably in the next class. But whatever that is, you gave the sechvi discernment to be able to differentiate between day and night. And we're all familiar with these brachos. We have, Shalosh Sani Goy, Shalosh Sani Abed. We have Pokeach Ivrim, Malbish Arumim, all these things. I know that not everyone here knows these blessings by heart, but I'm going to read to you a Gemara. And those of you who do have the Siddur, or perhaps I'll leave it here in front of you so you can see that what the Gemara describes is a much different procedure to the morning than what we do now. And you can even see this from the very fact that the order of the blessings is completely out of whack. So the Gemara begins. You wake up in the morning and you say, Elokai neshama shenasata bi tahorahi, ati yitzarta bi, ati nafachta bi, v'ata meshamre bikirbi, v'ata osi litla mimeni l'hachzir bi losi lova kozman shenashama bikirbi moda ani lefanecha, Hashem elokar v'lokei avosai ribon kol masim v'nkodon kol neshamas brochat Hashem amachaz v'neshamas l'gorim misim. So the Gemara says, what's the first thing that you say? It's not moda ani, it's Elokai neshama. Elokai neshama was the very first thing that they would say when they would wake up in the days of the Gemara. When Kishama Kol Tarnagola, when you would hear while lying in bed, after having awoken, after saying Elokai Neshama, you hear Kol Tarnagola, you hear the voice of the rooster. Lema, you say the following bracha, Baruch Asher Nasan Lasechvi Vinol Hachvin Ben Yom Uvein Laila. Blessed is he who gave the Sechvi, this discernment between day and night. That's the first bracha. Okay, that adds up. That's like what we do. But the next bracha is, okay, now, ki posach eine, when you open your eyes, lema, he should say, Baruch pokeach ivrim, blessed is he who provides sight to the blind. Ki saritz v'yasif, when he sits up, he says, Baruch matir asurim, blessed is he who frees the bound. Ki lavish, remember, they used to sleep naked. This is very clearly articulating the Gemara. So they would put on their clothing underneath their sheets, underneath their blankets. So they would begin getting themselves dressed. Lema Baruch Malbish Arumim. Ki Zakif, when he would actually sort of stand up, you would say, or not stand up, when you would sit up straight, you would say, Baruch Zokef Kafufim. Blessed is he who strengthens the bent. When you put your feet on the ground, Lema, you say, Baruch Roka Haaretz Alamayim. Blessed is he who spreads the earth over water. Kimaski, when you take your first step, Lema, you say, Baruch HaMechi Mitzadei Gover. Blessed is he who sets or prepares the steps of man. Kisaim Misane, when you start putting on your shoes, Lema Baruch Sha'asa Likol Tzarki. Blessed is he who fulfills all my needs. Ki Asar Hamaine, when he would actually put on his belt, he would say, Lema Baruch Ozer Yisrael Bigvura. Blessed is he who girds Israel with strength. Ki Paris Sudra, when he would put on his hat, he would say, Baruch Ozer Yisrael B'sif Ara. Blessed is he who crowns Israel with glory. Ki Ma'atef B'tzitzis, when he would put on his tzitzis, he would say, Baruch Asher Ki Deshanu B'mitzosu B'tzivanu Hisa'atef B'tzitzis. When he would put on his tefillin, he would then say, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzosu v'tzivanu l'haniach tefillin. So you'll notice here immediately the order of the brachos is very different. Not only that, not only is the order of the brachos completely out of whack with what we do, there are even additional brachos that we say that are not mentioned here. 3 of them, the Shalot Asanis, come from a completely different Gemara. We just sort of stuck them together, as we say in Yiddish. They're all sort of slammed together. And we'll talk about why the order is as it is, at least with regards to those 3. And each one of these brachos was said as you perform the task or the action that's described in the bracha. Why did we change? Why did we stop doing this? We know the change happened very, very early. Again, if you refer to the very first halachic writings that comes from the post-Talmudic period, you find from the writings of the Gaonim, especially Rav Natroni Gaon, who had questions addressed to him from the rabbis of Spain. He was a post-Talmudic rabbi in Babylon. And he writes in his responsa, yeah, that's what the Gemara says. We don't do that anymore. He says, we have to wash our hands now. So we say Al Natilas Yadayim first thing. We can't say God's name until we wash our hands. And once we're washing our hands, we make the bracha. Once we make the bracha, we say Asher Yotzar. Okay. Why then do we have all the orders of all these blessings done at shul and not associated with the actions? He says, well, because Sidurim are really expensive. You have to pay somebody to write it by hand. Not everyone is so well educated that they know how to make the brachos at home. We all go to shul. We have a shliach tzibur who recites them so that people who don't know how to make the brachos can answer amen. So there was a certain sociological need that precipitated a change in practice. Once we change the practice, we change the order, and that'll be the talk of the next class, why the order was changed to what we have today. And not all nuschos change it the way we do. That's definitely true. The nusach, some of the Sephardi nuschos have, even though they do say it in the synagogue also just like we do, but they have the order like what's found in the Gemara as opposed to our Minhag Ashkenaz changed order. We're going to talk about why that is. But it was in response to a societal need that people did not know the brachos, and therefore they would be recited at shul so that everyone can answer amen. This was a sociological pressure that necessitated a change in practice. And we know that this practice happened very, very early before the 8th or 9th century, because from the halakhic literature that comes from that point, they refer to this as being something that had been done for generations earlier and explain the reason and the explanation as to why. But it's by no means universal. The Rambam, Maimonides, held that the Gemara practice should be perpetuated, and these brachos should be said as you go through your morning routine. That was the Rambam's opinion. I'm sure that there are quite a number of people who do it that way, but that does not conform to normative Minhag Ashkenaz. Normative Minhag Ashkenaz is that the order gets all mished up, it gets all changed up, and we recite it at shul together as a community instead of us as saying it together as individuals. All right, that concludes the class. I'm open now for questions, comments, or rebuttals, and I'm going to just turn off the recording.